Welcome to The Savage Truth with Cicely Davis. I am your host, Cicely Davis.
Savage Truth, everyone. Welcome back. Always great to be back in the cultural saddle. This podcast is growing, and I would like to thank you. Truly thank you for taking your personal time to listen in and to watch. As always, I would like to ask you to please like, share, subscribe, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Now let's just get into it. Hear ye, step right up. It's American political history as the number 45 and 47 hopeful former President Donald J. Trump makes history, winning New Hampshire's Republican primary 3 times with a strong numeric voting percentage of 54.4%. That is a total of 172,870 votes, as 96% of the voting count is in. President Nixon winning the state in 72, 70, 68, and 60. Again, President Nixon winning the state of New Hampshire in 72, 68, and 60, respectively. Voting started at the stroke of midnight, Tuesday, January 23rd in New Hampshire, a northern border state, to set off the first in the nation presidential primary. Nikki Haley, with great hopes to be the front runner and alternative choice to Donald Trump in the purple state, but Republican voters made it very clear they see former President Donald J. Trump as not only the front runner in New Hampshire, but the incumbent and the leader of the Republican Party. The former president inherited quite a bit of the support of voters who had hopes for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who, as you all know, dropped out of the primary race this past Sunday after placing silver, that's second place, in the Iowa caucuses last Tuesday, endorsing the former president and asking his supporters to follow his lead and do the same in a video. In the 4-minute, 32-second video, the Floridian governor and former Republican primary candidate shared these remarks. I am today suspending my campaign. I'm proud to have delivered on 100% of my promises, and I will not stop now. It is clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. They watched his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and they see Democrats use lawfare to this day to attack him. I've had disagreements with Trump. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear, a repackaged form of warmed-over corporatism that Nikki Haley represents. The days of putting America last, of kowtowing to large corporations, of caving to woke ideology are over. I thank all of our passionate supporters who stood by us through it all. Winston Churchill once remarked that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And while this campaign has ended, the mission continues. Down here in Florida, we will continue to show the country how to lead. Thank you, and God bless. And I thought those were absolutely eloquent words for the former candidate and current Floridian governor. Nikki Haley dismissed the outcomes of the Iowa caucuses after placing third last week, referring to the Iowan caucuses as a coronation in reference to only 56,000 showing up to vote for Donald Trump, less than 1.5% of the state's population. And, I have a certain feeling about that. I mean, that's an interesting take on Tuesday from Haley. I think it is important, however, to point out and remind her and her supporters that Trump in Iowa had a historic win, And speaking of historic, the only candidate in the modern era to win New Hampshire 3 times, Donald J. Trump, who took the win with, again, 54.4%, holding, as of now, 172,870 votes. Nikki Haley took to the stage early, soon after the projected victory for Trump, to tell America, her supporters, and Republican Party that she is by no means bowing out, that the race is not over, and that she very much intends to go forward, looking forward to, of course, South Carolina, her home state. Haley congratulated the former president on his win in New Hampshire, but she questioned his cognition and challenged him to a debate. Now, for his victory speech, Trump was joined on stage by former GOP rivals Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, and a few others with a strong show of force. Trump answered to Haley's perceived bitterness, addressing his overwhelming projected favor to win in South Carolina and in Nevada. Though his speech took on a different tone from last Tuesday, I think the former president wanted to ensure a final answer back to Haley's attacks of his ability to lead and to move the party forward. In contrast to the strength and fresh air on the Republican side of the fence is Joe Biden, who continues in his political snub of voters. A no-show in Iowa, as well as New Hampshire, Joe Biden's absence was absolutely glaring. And with all eyes on Donald Trump, with his bid to lead Republicans back into the White House, it seems Joe Biden's reelection push has slipped under the radar in an unusual start to his campaign. Joe Biden had a dispute with officials in New Hampshire over scheduling, and as a result, was not on the ballot at the time of the New Hampshire primary kickoff. In fact, he was in Virginia for that nomination process. The danger in this, of course, was that quarrel threatened to leave the president in a theoretical second place behind little-known Democratic congressman out of my state, Minnesota, Dean Phillips, and the low-polling self-help author Marianne Williamson. In a debate with Williamson, Phillips remarked, he should be campaigning in New Hampshire. He should be showing up in front of voters. Now, let me take a little time to remind you all that Biden lost badly in overwhelmingly white New Hampshire in his bid for the Democratic nomination in 2020 and was only rescued by strong black voters in South Carolina primary. Then, once he was elected, he effectively dethroned New Hampshire along with fellow early nominating state Iowa, instructing the party leadership to place South Carolina ahead of both. Iowa caved quietly, but the move angered Democrats in New Hampshire, where first in the nation status is a sacred cow, and the Republicans who control the state government in Concord ignored that directive. In keeping with dirty politics, the Democratic National Committee responded by refusing to seat the state's delegates at the summer nomination convention in Chicago, essentially denying New Hampshire its stay. Many grassroots Democrats worried that even though Biden was not on the ballot, his performance against Phillips and Williamson will be judged as a measure of his popularity. So despite their anger over Biden's snub, and a big obvious snub it was indeed, local activists had determined to ensure his supporters know that they can actually write Biden's name on that ballot. This past Saturday, approximately 20 hardy, dedicated Biden supporters braved the biting cold to chant and wave banners that read, "Ask me about writing in Joe Biden." As a show of goodness, the supporters were rewarded with a cameo from Dean Phillips, who came out of his nearby campaign headquarters in New Hampshire to hand out coffee to his shivering opponents. One supporter said, "We've been working really hard on this write-in effort across the state, and I think voters today, those of us that are out here bearing the cold, are evidence of the enthusiasm for President Joe Biden." Some Biden aides have reportedly voiced concerns that the write-in effort could fall short, delivering an unnecessary defeat. So here's my take, my commentary on this. This, to me, is clear political malpractice. To skip New Hampshire, a swing state, where it could go either way, in a state where independents have a significant population, in essence, is political foolery. That's my opinion. then what? The Biden administration will go back to New Hampshire in 6 months while he's campaigning, coming out of his basement to ask for their support after offering them, saying, I know I didn't take the time to actually primary here or to show up, but we still count on your vote. We still expect your support, though you didn't really rank in any real significance for this campaign to stop over or to garner your support. Now, I'll leave that up to New Hampshire voters to decide if they will let that slide. It's up to them. Look, I understand that when you are an incumbent, particularly and especially a presidential incumbent, it comes with a lot of power. You get to cancel debates, you get to cancel primaries. Let's just say, it's truly par for the course. I mean, Donald Trump didn't debate any of his primary opponents. But this is Joe Biden, a deeply unpopular president. A president with Jimmy Carter numbers, perhaps even lower on some key issues. He needs to appeal to all voters, especially independents. This is undoubtedly a big mistake. His first primary appearance with his vice president was in Virginia last night. So while voters were out in New Hampshire staking it out, Joe Biden and Kamala were in Virginia. This makes absolutely no sense. So historically, folks, Democrat presidents seeking re-election typically garner around 80% of the vote in New Hampshire primary, and party strategists believe Biden needed to win somewhere around 60% to avoid humiliation. He did fall short of that number. But luckily for Biden as an incumbent and perhaps to the unique voting system of New Hampshire, Biden, of course, was able to pull out the win in New Hampshire in spite of his absence. The Biden-Harris officials didn't feel that New Hampshire was diverse enough for Biden to participate, which is why the administration is waiting for South Carolina. Biden didn't say anything about his write-in in New Hampshire on camera, but media was able to get a statement. Now, Biden was playing pundit, part of that statement saying, "It is now clear that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee." And then he kind of speaks to the write-in effort. He says, "I want to thank all of those who wrote my name in this evening in New Hampshire. It was a historic demonstration of our commitment to the democratic process." And that was it. That's it. I think it's clear from this statement that they truly don't take any of their Democratic challengers seriously. There was also a write-in for a ceasefire on the ballot. Okay. And it never ends. They're going to continue to only focus on Donald Trump and the issues they think help them, including the right to choose. And just as Nikki Haley announced her intent to continue in the battle as far out as July, I've even heard, so too was the battle cry from the Dean Phillips team. In a speech at an event in New Hampshire, Phillips said in an interview with Fox that if he got over 20%, he would consider that a win for him in this environment. In a speech soundbite, Phillips said, "This country deserves options. This country should not have coronations. And I know the exhausted majority of this country, center-right and center-left Americans, I know they'd much rather see a Nikki Haley-Dean Phillips matchup this November, and we're going to try to get that done." Not going to happen. I just don't see a path. I don't see the numbers. But you know what? Kudos for him for getting out there and making the attempt. They're feeling the pressure, but make no mistake, they are not feeling at all in any concern whatsoever for Dean Phillips as a threat to the Biden candidacy. They will now begin to talk like it's the general election with Trump's big win in New Hampshire last night. I think the political crystal ball is reflecting, at least as far as Dems and the Biden administration is concerned, a rematch between the two-party incumbents is inevitable this coming November. And this is what they want, and this is what they were actually hoping for. With border immigration concerns and the economy as the number one and number two issues for Americans across the political spectrum, and Biden's even lower approval rating at a new low of 33%, it seems the campaign is clearly on the struggle bus. Now, Biden claims after 3 years of a hard stance that the border is secure, along with Mayorkas. Joe Biden commented to the media he has since flip-flopped on his stance, saying that the border is not secure and that it hasn't been for a decade. He then comments, "Give me the money." The border is clearly a losing issue for the president, but he feels locked in because he is beholden to the far left, whom he doesn't want to lose their support. Clearly, this is a disastrous administration. I've said it before, and I'll continue to do so. You know it. The Biden administration knows it. The American people know it. The New York Times knows it. As I have here, Nikki Haley was an illusion. It just shattered, as written by the New York Times as a headline for today's news. This includes Democrats. Make no mistake, the people know that the Biden-Kamala Harris administration is a mistake and that they are struggling and they're feeling the pressure. It's a disastrous administration. This includes, as I said, this includes Democrats, this includes never-Trumpers, moderates, both red and blue, and independents. The far left may be somewhat happy with at least the way things are trending or going in this country, but they absolutely cringe at the thought of Donald J. Trump back in the saddle. For them, the country isn't broke enough. There are still too many statutes, not enough illegals, too little government jobs. They want an eradicated border, a forgotten history, sexualized children, a non-existent legal system with no jails, no prisons, no observance or respect for the law. They want wealthy elites, a hollowed-out middle class that is now the working poor with more regulation and bigger government. The primary family is destroyed, no longer the foundation of our society, with no Judeo-Christian faith observance whatsoever. They want a society that has controlled and censored speech, no guns for protection, and certainly no alpha males who stand up and defend themselves, their family, their country, and their right to serve the God they choose. You know, the media likes to set these high artificial expectations for winning margins, especially for Republican candidates. You know, Republicans need to be over 50% or they need to be over 60%. But I like to remind everyone that when Trump, who was in the same position as Joe Biden as an incumbent in 2020, Donald Trump got 84.4% of the vote in New Hampshire over Bill Weld. So for me, the bar was high for Biden as an incumbent. Can you actually run with the strength of an incumbent with 84% of the wins like Trump? And even your pal Obama, who had 90% of the wins. I have to admit that. Obama won 90%. This is the bar. Can he meet it? So far, Biden is 0 for 2. The story lies in this very moment, as Donald Trump truly defies all conventional political gravity. He is unlike any candidate we have ever seen in this country in our lifetime, in our history. You have to truly view this as a phenomenon that we're living through right now, to witness this, to witness him. What an incredible privilege to be alive and to watch and be a part of this time in our history, in our country. Most don't see a path for Nikki Haley. I know I don't. That includes her home state of South Carolina and Super Tuesday states, reflecting a high favor for Donald J. Trump. Governor Sununu predicting a landslide for Nikki Haley, that did not come to fruition. He being a powerful force, a very well-liked, very popular governor in New Hampshire, very influential, doesn't get along with Donald Trump, but he is sensible enough to say that he will support him in the general election if Donald Trump is up against Joe Biden. So at least there is some semblance of common sense and sensibility there. But if you were to go back to the theme of 2016, what was that theme? What was the message? Who and what was the focus that propelled Donald Trump to victory? the forgotten men and the forgotten women in this country. And when you look at 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck as current, many people using credit cards to pay for groceries, gas, and to pay bills, people cashing in their pensions. The stock market gains are great, but that only impacts 8% of this population here in America. It was a huge mistake for Joe Biden to skip out on Iowa and New Hampshire because of his failing popularity. It's not like he would have had to debate anyone. He gets to call the shots. He's the incumbent again. He would have won with greater margins and showed some much-needed care for the people in those states. As of last Friday, after 27 days, I need to remind everyone, Joe Biden has been public for only 5 of those 27 days. This tells me they're going to keep him in the basement. They are not confident in his ability to endure the demands of the campaign, to do speeches, debates, constant touring, remembering stats and answering to the press, knowing who's who, where he is at any given time, what day it is, which side of the stage to exit, or for even reading the teleprompter. In contrast, this was a definitive, decisive win, however, for Donald Trump. It makes for interesting terrain for the general election. Keep in mind that in New Hampshire, there were more independents and Democrats voting in the GOP primary than registered Republicans themselves. Now, I brought up that headline in New York Times, Nikki Haley was an illusion, it's just shattered. And I read into that article, and it talks about how Democrats actually caroused around Nikki Haley, supporting her, voting in the primary last night to simply keep Trump out. So mind you, this isn't about people pulling together. We are still very divided. There was just a deep interest on Democrats and independents' part to oust Donald Trump. So there's much work to be done politically up until November. In an exit poll of CNN it conducted in New Hampshire, it found that a staggering 70% of the people who voted for Haley were not registered Republicans. And I'm going to show you those. I'll talk about the results of that poll. Now, this specifically is pertaining to the Haley party registration. 70% were registered undeclared voters. 27% were registered Republicans, and only 3% were unregistered before the day of voting, the day before Tuesday. So Monday, the day before voting on Tuesday, only 3% were unregistered who actually voted for Nikki Haley. The right thing for the country is for Republicans to come together. Now is the time. If Nikki Haley remains in, challenging Trump, causing time and resources to be spent on a party opponent instead of Joe Biden, it will send a signal that her only path to victory is for Donald Trump to be eliminated by forces outside of this process. For instance, secretaries of state like Maine and elsewhere. I believe that to be wrong for our party, wrong for our country. There's clearly no viable path for her to defeat him through the front door or to do so outright. Far-left radicals hope to rid Donald Trump of his candidacy through illegitimate means. And for that reason, this needs to be a one-person Republican run. Listen, I ran in an impossible district, and I know what it feels like to have literally all the odds stacked against you. And I had a primary candidate remain in the race in spite of my win of the endorsement. I was the Republican endorsed candidate for CD5 Minnesota. I had to keep my primary opponent in mind while also remaining vigilant and mindful of my opponent on the other side of the aisle. And it's really difficult to do that. One thing I think we can all agree on is that our party needs to be united, to come together and solidify a win. New Hampshire is unique, a strange state in a sort of way. With 43% of the population identifying as independent, sounds a lot like most of the rest of our country today. They don't want to be identified as Democrat or Republican. A lot of people have an issue or take issue with the two-party system, but different states have different rules. In South Carolina, you don't have to declare at all. Everyone gets to vote for whomever they want. In Nevada, it's even more different. Nikki Haley said that a Trump nomination is a Biden win. Well, we shall see. But what I do know is that we have a former incumbent who has a track record of winning and addressing the issues that Americans care about. Republicans need to decide to rally behind and support him and focus efforts to get our country back by getting on the offense. We need to point out that it's Democrats who have taken away jobs and educational transparency. They have decreased the value of the dollar and incentivized criminals. It was Democrats and far-left radical leaders who defunded the police, stopped drilling, empowered our foreign enemies, and alienated our allies. Because of their policies, illegal immigrants have rights to health care, IDs, driver's licenses, housing, flying privileges, and jobs that Americans have been squeezed out for or bypassed. We need to fight the far left agenda with the same tenacity and relentlessness we do each other and bring this country and its people back to common sense and decency and pride in the freest country in the world with the very most promise for the future. No man has endured more, been harassed more, given more, sacrificed more, or fought harder than Donald Trump. He has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he has all it takes and more to set this country back on track. We have to ask the right questions and do the right thing. If your life is not better than it was 4 years ago, then what must I do? Who must I vote in and out to achieve the American way of life? Vote that way in November. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, be bold, be strong, be faithful, be true. Till next time, I'm Cicely.
The Savage Truth with Cicely Davis is a production of Front Page Magazine and the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.